Hello, everybody. I'm EliFathi. I'm the CEO of MindBridge AI. For the next 20 minutes or so, I'm going to talk about embracing change. In the days of AI, the fourth industrial revolution, how do we manage with ethics, empathy, and the creation of responsible AI to help us manage and navigate through this revolution? As you know, AI is changing everything. And I'm going to outline some of the key elements associated with that. To start with, the world is awash with data. In 2018, 12 zettabytes were produced. In reality is that only 0.05% of the data that is being generated is actually being used by businesses. So even though we have a lot of data, what the world is seeking and starving for are insights. So what's preventing us from adopting the AI in a big way? There are four fundamental issues over the past 4 years or so since the new spring in terms of AI has happened. And just to deviate for a second, when you talk about winters and spring, AI is not something new. AI existed since 1956. And every time that there is interest, you have a spring. And when there are disillusioned with what the results are, you have what is known as winter. We are now in the spring since the purchase of DeepMind by Google. We are talking about the spring, the current spring. So in the last 4 years, what preventing us from really adopting AI-based applications? There are four aspects that we should look at. One is the black box of AI, human biases, ethics, and privacy. Let's tackle each one of those specifically. In terms of the black box, you probably remember when you were in university where the professor say, don't give me the answer, show me how you got there. And what is so important is that when data is being fed into the AI-based system, the question is, the results are produced, but do we know how they were derived? What should I trust? Why should I trust it? Why should I believe in what the information is? It's no different than the professor asking you the same question. What we need to do is glass box and not black box. And this is what is known as explainable AI. And there is a lot of developments are being done to ensure that the information that is presented is in terms of explainable AI. Human biases. It's really important to know computers and AI are not the problem. Human are the problem. There are 180 biases that are available. And as human, we have three categories. One is confirmation bias, when we look for evidence to confirm our initial assumptions. Two is availability bias, where we give too much credence and weight to recent evidence. And finally, excessive coherence, where we create coherent story too quickly without really too much evidence. The ethical aspect is something that is really very important. MIT has developed what is known as the ethical machine, where they give people choices and say, what do you think? And what's interesting that around the world, there is a big difference between what people think and they want to act on based on their belief. So there is an example, sparing the elderly versus sparing the young. When MIT provided this question, you can see that in the Eastern society, emphasis was on the elderly, whereas in the Western and Southern was on the young. The same thing you can see in here, the difference in opinions and belief between East and West. And then finally, in terms of sparing the higher status versus the lower status. So when you're developing a system like that is going to go across the world, how are you going to deal with that? In terms of algorithms, we have to make sure that the algorithms have the assurance to prevent corruption of the training data, because the computer, the AI, is learning from data sets. And we have to ensure that it's not corrupting the results. And the same thing, resiliency. We want to avoid enforcement of biases. In terms of privacy, we know that we utilize data to develop our and train our algorithms. And there is a danger that when we are reading these data sets, there'll be leakage and the personal information will be identified. And the same thing, it's either via leakage or inference. So we have to make sure that our algorithms are solid and will not enable these kind of leakages to take place. Why? Because you're going to end up with personal information showing on one of the social media posts. In terms of individuals, we obviously can opt out, and where we have the ability to opt out, clearly we are giving a lot of our information on social media freely. But if we want to opt out on something that is organized, it's our right to say we are not interested to be part of that. And clearly we want to tell governments to change the rules to enable us to do things that are in the way that we feel are within our belief system. At the end of the day, it's up to companies like MindBridge to develop and create responsible AI systems. These are systems that are lawful, that adhere to government regulations across all the world, wherever we function. It has to be human-centric. The AI is here to serve the human. It has to be ethical. It has to be robust, that after we implement them, we're not going to have a problem where people can hack them and change the algorithms. Before I go into more detail, the AI revolution created a lot of issues, and we are very concerned, governments, individuals, leaders, and everyone should be concerned and say, is it going to be the utopia that we think that it is, or are we thinking that it is dystopia? My role here is not to select any of these decisions for you. I'm not going to tell you which one. I'm going to present and you can make the decision. But what's important, if you look at what we know as the fourth industrial revolution, there is a very interesting book written by Klaus Schwab. Klaus Schwab, if you don't know him, is the chairman and founder of the World Economic Forum. And they identified about over 20 different items that they felt trends that are going to take place in the industry. And they talked about tipping point. One example was to deal with wearable. They felt that by the year 2025, we're going to have 10% of people wearing, if it's iWatch or the clothing or sunglasses or reading glasses, whatever it is, wearable. When we get to 10%, it will be a tipping point. In terms of AI and the white-collar jobs, they talked about that the tipping point for accounting will be where 30% of all corporate audits will be done by AI. And they kind of look at it that the tipping points will take place around 2025, which is only short 5 years away from now. It's what's interesting, and this is really important how it's impacting us, that when the AI-based system will start to get into our lives, what we're going to see, wave of replacement. So in this diagram, you're seeing that the current systems are still in place and AI systems are starting to take over. And when the inflection point happens, you're going to see a lot of wave of replacement where the AI-based systems are going to take over. So let's give some examples. Let's start by looking at manufacturing and see the impact of AI on some of these different, both blue collar as well as white collar jobs. Every time that you have a robot replacing a human, 5.6 jobs get lost. There are 350 million manufacturing positions in the world. If you do the math, after you have 60 million robots, what's going to happen with humans? Let's look at the service industry. There are 3.6 million cashiers in North America. Just about 3 years ago, Amazon did what is known as the concept store, Amazon Go. We know that Walmart did the same thing, where you go into a store, you pick up a cart, you go and pick up the things that you want to buy, the purchase, you put it in the cart, and you leave. and the system automatically will recognize who you are, will debit your credit card, and there you go. So what will happen with these positions once this takes place? The next issue is industry's autonomous vehicle. We know that there are a lot of regulations associated with that for safety. We know that the first area to be automated will be the long haul trucking industry because they are dealing with highways. So the question is, what about the cascading effects of autonomous vehicle on our lives? So number one, once you start to have these kind of autonomous vehicle, you're going to have less accident. If you have less accident, you need less policemen, you need less body shops, you need less hospital, and so on. So there are cascading effects that are going to impact our basically way of life. Now, I'm not suggesting whatsoever that this is the utopia or the dystopia. I'm saying that as we use AI-based system, there is an impact on our society, and it's up to governments, it's up to corporation, it's up to each individual of us to see what can be done to minimize the problems associated with that. On the other end, we are seeing there is a lot of opportunities and new jobs that are being created in social media and others that we are seeing that are taking place and replacing some of these jobs. And clearly, data scientists and other activities, other professions are benefiting from the AI. So let's continue now and see how can we bring humanity to have more adoption of AI. I'm going to start by talking about the normal life cycle of technology adoption. This is nothing to do with AI necessarily. This is a normal adoption of technology that was identified, I believe, by one of the professors from Harvard. And what you look in here, you see that when there's new technology, you have high expectation. You think, wow, this is going to do everything, including cooking my breakfast. And then as time progresses, you realize that it's very complicated. There is effort. It's something that you are not familiar with. And sometimes what we end up is the valley of death, where people just give up. And this uncertainty and frustration, uh, if it is really, really too high, will just kill the project. But if you are able to sustain that and move forward, you're going to see the light at the end of the tunnel. And when you come out of this dark tunnel, you say, wow, I've never been better before. How can I use it all the time? And why didn't I use it before? So this is a typical technology cycle adoption. What about AI? If you look at the way that it's done, the problem why adoption of AI system fail is because we really interchange technical change with adaptive change. So let me illustrate. When you're dealing with a technical change, what you're dealing with, instead of streaming video with Netflix that we do now, you used to have Blockbuster where you can have the DVD. Or instead of hiring a taxi by whistling to it or calling, you now use an app. Or Airbnb, the same thing. Instead of being in a hotel, you go to somebody else's house, but it's all structured. There's not a big change, hotel versus personal home. But adaptive change is much more complicated. If you look at women emancipation, it took 60 years to get women to get the vote. It had to change laws. It had to convince many governments. It had to get both the state, the municipality, the state, the federal governments all took a lot of effort in order to change that. It takes time. So when you apply technical change to solve an adaptive challenges, you're going to have problems with it. And this is what are creating failures. If you consider 70% of all transformations fail for a variety of reasons, but what happened is these are the barriers to change. people say, I don't understand the AI. It's too complicated. How do you spell AI? I don't trust AI. And I just am not familiar with this area, so I don't want to do it. But for those that have transformed and successfully, basically it all deals with one common denominator. What it is, it's leadership. And in terms of the leadership, what is really important here that emotional quotient, and this is really the EQ, is absolutely very important. The leadership has to come from the top in organizations. And we know governments are very much in favor in AI. They recognize that it's technology that will help to improve our lives. We know that PwC identified that by the year 2030, within 15 years, we're going to have $15 trillion that are going to be added to the economy because of AI. And governments obviously want to have part of that, and it is part of our life. But the emotional quotient is really where companies dealing with individuals, government deals with the citizen. What's important is that the emotional quotient really comes down to three things. When you are dealing with anybody, if it's your children, if it's your colleagues, or it's subordinate, be present, be compassionate and selflessness, and have empathy. These are the things that people strive to have and are very interested, and they will follow, and the successful adoption of the system will take place. If you look at what we need to do in terms of changing the roadmap, it's very simple. You need to focus on people. You cannot just shove technology down the throat of employees or government or the citizen. You need to ensure that the citizen are happy. You need to ensure that the employees are happy. So focus on the people first. You need to empower all level in a corporation. If you want to have proper adoption of the technology, the AI-based application, the chairman of the board, the CEO, the leadership team, the managers, and the employees that are implementing it have to be empowered and believe that they're going to do it. And then finally, you have to make the change real. You have to succeed by making sure that everybody is on the same wavelength. And AI-based applications are part of our life. We already use a lot of AI right now. If it's Alexa, if it's Siri, if you are getting recommendation from Netflix, we have AI in all of our life right now, and it's growing in popularity and usage. And that's something that we have to recognize and accept. Now, I would like to leave us by talking about a little bit about Canada. Canada is a powerhouse in AI, and this is really very important. I know that this is an international conference that we're dealing with, and it's important to know that our government were very forthcoming in supporting of AI. There was a major investments that were done in Canadian AI technology. The government created 3 centers of excellence, one in Toronto, the Vector Institute, one in Montreal, the Mila Institute, and one in Edmonton, the Amy Institute. We have Toronto has the highest concentration of AI startup in the world. We know that Montreal is the highest concentration of research and students of deep learning in the world. We have probably the top 3 smart people, what we call them the 3 wise men, that are Canadian, Jeffrey Hinton in Toronto, Joshua Bengio in Montreal. So we are really very and Mr. Sutton, Dr. Sutton in Edmonton. So we are very fortunate that the government, as well as the provincial governments, are supporting the AI. It's something that we also have a very ethical AI. We have the Montreal Declaration to talk about ethical AI and building AI that is ethical. And of course, from the job perspective, we create a lot of jobs in the AI area. So all in all, my message to you is that this is a very important area. The AI is going to be staying here with us. We need to embrace it. And I personally want to make sure that I believe that every organization should be able to understand and trust the data that is vital to their solutions and to their business. Thank you very much.